My name is Anya Petrova, and for as long as I can remember, my hands have wanted to build things. It started with intricate sandcastles on the misty shores of the Oregon coast, structures so detailed they seemed to grieve when the tide came in. Then it was elaborate models of the bridges that stitch my city, River's End, together over the Willamette River. I was fascinated by systems, by the elegant flow of connection that makes a complex thing work as a single, harmonious entity. That fascination is what led me to software engineering, to the digital architecture that underpins our modern world. And it's what led me to Viridian Stream. 7 years ago, Viridian Stream wasn't a company. It was an idea sketched on a whiteboard in a damp, second-floor office overlooking the Burnside Bridge. The rain-streaked windows rattled when the MAX train went by, and the air smelled perpetually of old coffee and ambition. There was no product, just a charismatic founder, Marcus Thorne, who could sell the dream of a sunset to a blind man. He had the vision, but he didn't have the hands to build it. I did. I spent 7 years of my life breathing life into that idea. 7 years of 18-hour days, of holidays celebrated with the glow of a monitor for candlelight, of a life deferred for the promise of creating something truly revolutionary. I was the chief systems architect. The product, NexusFlow, was a real-time global logistics platform, a symphony of code that tracked everything from shipping containers crossing the Pacific to artisanal cheese being delivered to a local market. It was my sandcastle, my bridge model, my life's work made tangible in lines of code and flowing data. It was the heart of Viridian Stream, and without it, the company, now valued at over $300 million, would be nothing more than a pretty logo and an empty promise. I knew every function, every API call, every hidden vulnerability, because I hadn't just written the code, I had nurtured it. And yet, there I stood, in the sterile, light-drenched conference room on the 40th floor of the U.S. Bancorp Tower, the whole of River's End sprawling beneath us like a map of my own history. Before me sat the entire executive team, the department heads, and even a few junior developers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Marcus Thorne, his tie a perfect silk knot, his smile a polished veneer, slid a crisp, white envelope across the vast expanse of the glass table. It landed before me with a quiet, final thud. "Congratulations, Anya. You're terminated," he said, the words delivered with the same smooth confidence he used on investors. The smirk that accompanied them wasn't one of victory, but of dismissal, as if he were swatting away a fly. A strange calm settled over me. It felt like the moment after a lightning strike, when the air is still and charged. I looked at the envelope, a paltry severance for a life's work, and then at Marcus. Around the table, people shifted. Layla, our head of operations, and one of the few people I considered a friend, wouldn't meet my eyes. Simon, the CTO who had been my peer and partner for years, studied a fixed point on the far wall. The younger faces watched with a morbid curiosity, as if this were just another scene in a corporate drama. Effective immediately, Marcus added, his tone dripping with the oily platitudes of HR speak. "We're restructuring. A new direction for the company. You understand." Oh, I understood. I understood perfectly. I also knew something Marcus, in his soaring arrogance, had completely overlooked. I stood up slowly, my movements deliberate. I unclipped the ID badge from the lapel of my jacket, the plastic rectangle that had been a part of my identity for 7 years, and placed it gently on the table. It made a soft clicking sound against the glass. Then I leaned forward, just enough for my voice to carry across the silent room, not in a shout, but in a clear, resonant tone. "Then I began, pausing to let the weight of the silence press in on everyone. You have a very good explanation ready for the investors when NexusFlow goes dark in exactly 9 minutes. The room, which had been tense, froze solid. Marcus blinked, his practiced smile faltering for the first time. "Excuse me." A small, sad smile touched my lips, one that I knew didn't reach my eyes. "Check your monitoring dashboard, Marcus. I'm sure you'll see the countdown already running." A nervous tremor ran through the room. Someone coughed. A laptop lid snapped open with a sharp crack. The director of human resources, a woman who specialized in anodyne pleasantries, went pale. And then, Like the first crack in a dam, the panic began. Marcus's composure evaporated. He shot to his feet so quickly that his expensive ergonomic chair scraped backwards across the floor. "What did you do?" he demanded, his voice a half-strangled bark. I didn't need to answer. I straightened the fabric of my jacket, picked up the small, pathetic cardboard box they had provided for my personal effects, a framed photo of my dog, a worn copy of a programming manual, a chipped coffee mug, and walked toward the door. As my hand touched the handle, I glanced back. I saw Simon, the CTO, typing frantically, his face a mask of dawning horror. Two senior engineers were already sprinting out a side door, presumably toward the server room. Marcus was jabbing at his phone, his face contorted in a snarl, calling anyone, who he thought could fix this. 8 minutes now, I said, my voice soft in the suddenly chaotic room. Then I stepped into the hallway, the heavy door swinging shut behind me, muffling the sound of an empire beginning to crumble. Let me take you back. This wasn't a sudden act of spite. It was the culmination of a slow, painful realization. When I joined Viridian Stream, we were a family, or so I thought. We shared cheap pizza over late-night debugging sessions and celebrated funding rounds with champagne in plastic cups. Marcus would clap me on the shoulder in front of investors and say, "Anya is the soul of this company. She's the architect of our future." And for years, I believed him. I believed in the shared dream. But about a year ago, the atmosphere began to change. It was subtle at first. My access to certain financial reports was quietly revoked. Strategic conversations would halt when I entered a room, resuming in hushed tones after I'd left. Marcus, who once sought my counsel on every technical decision, began making them with a new team of consultants I'd never met. I wasn't a fool. I had seen this narrative play out before in the brutal theater of the tech industry. The founding engineer, the one who built the foundation, is eventually seen not as an asset, but as a liability, too expensive, too integral, too powerful. They bring in cheaper, younger talent, rewrite the company history to center the visionary CEO, and then push the architect out in the name of progress. The confirmation came last week. I saw a document left carelessly on the office printer, a draft of an employment contract. It was for my position, Chief Systems Architect, offered to a young man named Liam with a flashy resume from a competitor, and, I was sure, a salary that was a fraction of mine. They weren't just replacing me. Marcus was trying to erase me. My name was already being quietly scrubbed from patent filings and internal documentation, my legacy being reassigned to a team effort led by him. That was when the quiet sadness in my heart hardened into something else, resolve. Marcus believed NexusFlow was a machine he owned. He failed to understand that I had built it more like a living organism. It was resilient, self-healing, and deeply protective of its own integrity. 6 months ago, when the first whispers of my obsolescence began, I embedded a new protocol deep within its core. I called it the Guardian Protocol. It wasn't a malicious time bomb or a piece of ransomware. It was a failsafe, an immune response. The system was designed to interpret the unsanctioned, forceful revocation of its creator's credentials, my credentials, as a hostile takeover. In such an event, it wouldn't delete data or corrupt files. That would be vandalism, a betrayal of my own creation. Instead, it would initiate a total, orderly shutdown. It would take itself offline, preserving its own integrity until the threat was removed. Every server, every API, every database connection would go dormant, sealed in a digital cryostasis. As I walked toward the elevator, the muffled shouts from the boardroom grew louder. "Get IT on the line now." "What the hell does she mean?" goes dark. "Are the databases backed up?" I pressed the call button, my hands steady. My heart wasn't pounding with adrenaline or rage. It was beating with a slow, rhythmic certainty. Marcus had made one critical, catastrophic error. He assumed I was just a cog in the machine he had built. He was about to learn, in exactly 7 minutes, that I was the machine, and without its soul, his gilded empire was just a hollow shell. By the time the elevator doors whispered open in the ground floor lobby, my phone had already buzzed with 7 missed calls, all from Viridian Stream's main line. I walked out into the cool, damp river's end air. The sky was a familiar shade of thoughtful gray, and a light drizzle was beginning to fall, speckling the pavement. I got into my car, a modest Subaru that had seen me through countless late-night drives home from the office, and just sat there for a moment, watching the digital clock on the dashboard. The numbers ticked over. 9 a.m. And right on cue, Nexus Flow, the digital circulatory system for hundreds of companies worldwide, went dark. I could picture the scene in the office with perfect clarity. Marcus, staring at a screen filled with cascading error messages. The frantic, useless clatter of keyboards as engineers tried to reboot servers that would not respond. The dawning, sickening realization that nothing was coming back online. Global clients, their entire supply chains grinding to a halt, would be discovering that their dashboards were suddenly lifeless. Shipment trackers, warehouse integrations, delivery confirmations, all gone. Viridian Stream, the darling of the logistics industry, had just become a very expensive, very silent brick. My phone vibrated again. It was Layla. I recognized her number. She was one of the good ones, someone who probably knew this was wrong but felt powerless to stop it. I looked at her name on the screen, a pang of regret in my chest, and let it ring until it went to voicemail. Not yet. Let them all sit with the consequences of their decision. Let them marinate in the silence they had created. I drove home, not rushing. I stopped at my favorite local coffee shop, Guava Coffee Roasters, and ordered a latte. I even chatted with the barista about the persistent drizzle, a mundane, peaceful conversation that felt like it was happening in a different universe from the chaos unfolding just a few miles away. When I stepped through the front door of my small craftsman bungalow in the Laurel Hiss neighborhood, the scent of old books and lavender greeted me. It was my sanctuary. I put my phone on the kitchen counter, where it immediately began to buzz and light up. 12 missed calls from Marcus. 6 from Layla. 2 from Simon. A desperate text message from a number I didn't recognize. Please call. The system is down. We need to talk. I ignored it all. I put on a record, a gentle, instrumental album by a local band. I made myself a cup of tea, the Earl Grey steam fogging the window pane that looked out onto my rain-soaked garden. Unlike Marcus, I was not panicking. I was waiting. An hour later, there was a knock on my door. Loud, insistent, and bordering on frantic. I checked the peephole. It wasn't building security or, God forbid, the police. Not yet, anyway. It was Layla, her face pale and strained. Standing just behind her, shifting his weight awkwardly on my porch, was Simon, the CTO. I opened the door, but only a few inches, leaving the chain on. I raised an eyebrow. Layla. Simon. What an unexpected surprise. Layla's voice was tense. Anya, we have to talk. Do we? I asked, my tone quiet and even. Last I checked, I don't work for you anymore. Simon ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. Look, Anya, there's been a misunderstanding. A short, humorless laugh escaped my lips. I couldn't help it. A misunderstanding? Which part was the misunderstanding, Simon? The public firing? The insulting severance envelope? Or the part where you all sat there in silence while Marcus tried to erase 7 years of my life? Layla's shoulders slumped. She glanced at Simon, then back at me, her eyes pleading. Can we please come in? I considered them for a long moment, 2 ghosts from a life that had ended just a few hours ago. Finally, I sighed, unlatched the chain, and stepped aside. Shoes off, I said softly. They shuffled inside, looking profoundly out of place in the warm, quiet space of my living room. They stood awkwardly on the hardwood floor, like children who had been called to the principal's office. I didn't offer them a seat. I sat in my favorite armchair, crossed my legs, and waited. Simon was the first to speak, his voice strained. The system. Nexus Flow, it's offline. I tilted my head, feigning contemplation. Offline, I repeated. As in a catastrophic failure? A full-stack lockdown? Clients screaming, contracts being breached, investors probably circling like vultures? Am I getting warm? He swallowed hard. Dead on. Layla stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her. Look, Anya, we know. We know this was handled terribly. Marcus, he was impulsive. He made a mistake. But this can be fixed. You can fix it. Can I? I leaned back in my chair, letting the question hang in the air. You have to, Simon blurted out, desperation cracking his voice. This could destroy the company. We're talking about millions in penalties, lawsuits. He trailed off, realizing he was only highlighting my leverage. I let the silence stretch, thick and uncomfortable. I watched them squirm, the weight of their complicity settling on their shoulders. Finally, I spoke. Let me guess. Marcus didn't come himself because he's too proud? Or is he too busy hiding under his desk and screaming into a pillow? Layla and Simon exchanged a quick, telling glance. They didn't have to say anything. Their silence was confirmation enough. I stood and walked over to my small writing desk. I opened my laptop and typed a few commands. The screen came to life, not with the public-facing dashboard, but with my private administrative console. A sea of red alerts filled the display. Critical failure, authentication chain broken, core operations halted, node integrity compromised. Simon leaned forward, his eyes widening. Wait, you still have access? A faint smile played on my lips. Of course I do. I built the back door 6 years ago. It's for emergencies. I guess this qualifies. I turned the laptop so they could see the screen clearly. Look closely, I said, pointing to a specific line of diagnostic code. The system isn't broken. It's not damaged. It's protecting itself. When my primary credentials were revoked, the Guardian Protocol interpreted it as a hostile infiltration. This is a standard security feature. You would have known that if you'd been paying attention during the architecture reviews, Simon. His face flushed a deep red. Layla buried her face in her hands for a moment, then looked up, her expression one of pure exhaustion. So you can bring it back online, she asked quietly. You can just turn it back on? I closed the laptop with a soft click. I walked to the window and looked out at the glistening green leaves of the maple tree in my yard. The city felt miles away. My company, or the one that should have been mine, felt like a dream from which I was finally waking. That depends, I said, turning back to face them, my voice calm and steady. It depends on how much Marcus is willing to pay to buy back the soul he just tried to throw away. Layla blinked, her mouth slightly agape. You're serious. I crossed my arms. Deadly serious. You wanted Nexus Flow without me. Fine. You've had a taste of what that's like. Now, if you want it back, we negotiate. On my terms. Simon scoffed, a flicker of his old corporate bravado returning. This is blackmail. I tilted my head, my gaze unwavering. No, Simon. This is a business lesson. One you and Marcus so kindly taught me this morning. The room fell silent again, but this time it was a silence filled with dawning realization. They finally understood. They had mistaken my quiet dedication for weakness, my passion for naivety. They were wrong. Layla finally broke the stillness, her voice barely a whisper. What do you want, Anya? I allowed myself a slow, deliberate smile, letting the tension build. Oh, we'll get to that. But first, I think this is a conversation Marcus needs to have with me himself. Don't you? Simon opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He knew. They both knew. The quiet architect they thought they could discard without a second thought had just become the most powerful person in their world. 15 minutes later, the sound of a car braking too hard echoed from the street outside. I didn't need to look. It was the sound of panicked importance of someone who believed the rules of the road and everything else didn't apply to them. A moment later, a frantic, hammering knock rattled my front door, 3 sharp, percussive bangs that screamed open this door before I break it down. I let him wait. I took a slow sip of my now lukewarm tea. I let him knock again, the sound even more insistent this time. Then, with a deep, centering breath, I walked to the door and opened it. Marcus Thorne stood on my porch, a mess of raw, unchecked fury. His perfect silk tie was loosened, his shirt collar unbuttoned. A sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead, and his usually immaculate hair was disheveled. The arrogant, untouchable CEO who had fired me with a smirk just hours ago now looked like a man who had stared into the abyss and seen it staring back. You think this is a game? He snarled, pushing past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. I didn't move. I simply closed the door behind him, enclosing him in the quiet space he had so rudely invaded. Layla and Simon had retreated to the far side of the living room, standing like statues, wanting no part of the storm that had just arrived. Marcus spun to face me, his eyes wild. "Turn it back on. Now." I raised an eyebrow. "You seem stressed, Marcus. Having a difficult day?" He jabbed a finger in my direction, his hand trembling slightly. "You're playing with fire, Anya. This is sabotage. It's criminal. You'll be hearing from my—" "Careful," I interrupted, my voice still quiet, but now laced with a thread of steel. "You're one bad sentence away from making this a matter the SEC would be very interested in." He froze, his jaw tight. He was breathing heavily, but beneath the bluster, I could see it clearly, pure, undiluted fear. He knew how bad this was. He knew his entire world was hanging by a thread, and I was the one holding the scissors. I walked back to my desk, opened my laptop again, and turned the screen toward him. I had pulled up the live impact reports, which were still being fed to my private console. 78% of our enterprise clients are reporting complete operational failure, I said, my voice as calm as a news anchor's. That's 93 separate service-level agreements breached. Legal has already received 17 formal notices of intent to sue. The investor group chat on Signal is asking one question. Is Viridian Stream insolvent? I gestured to the screen. Look familiar? Marcus's hands clenched into fists at his sides. You're bluffing. Layla shook her head from across the room. Her voice was quiet, but carried the weight of truth. She's not, Marcus. I've been on the phone. The clients are frantic. They think we've been hit by a catastrophic cyber attack. They have been, I said, folding my arms. By your greed. Marcus's face went through a rapid series of transformations, from fury to denial, and finally, to a desperate, ugly pragmatism. Fine, he hissed. Name your price. I let the silence hang in the room, watching him unravel. I wanted him to feel the full weight of his powerlessness. Then, I walked to a bookshelf, not to a computer, and pulled down a simple, elegant leather-bound portfolio. Inside was not a hard drive, but a set of meticulously prepared paper documents. Analog. Untouchable. Here's how this is going to work, I said, laying the portfolio on my coffee table. I will provide you with the single-use cryptographic key to deactivate the Guardian protocol and restore Nexus flow. It will be a clean restoration. No backdoors, no lingering bugs. Full operational integrity. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. And in return? A real smile, the first one of the day, finally touched my lips. In return, I take what was always mine by right, if not by contract. I opened the portfolio. First, a 51% controlling stake in all intellectual property rights for Nexus Flow, retroactive, and in perpetuity. Second, my immediate reinstatement, not as an architect, but as Chief Technology Officer, with a permanent, unremovable seat on the board of directors. Third, a personal buyout of $5 million, which we will call a retention and restoration bonus, for the breach of trust and the emotional distress of being fired from the company I built. And one last thing. I leaned forward, my gaze locking with his. A public statement, signed by you and the entire board, to be released to all major tech journals and news outlets, acknowledging me as the sole creator and principal architect of the Nexus Flow platform. No vague corporate language. No team effort nonsense. My name. My credit. Marcus's mouth fell open. He looked from me to the documents and back again. You're insane. That's half the company. I laughed, a soft, genuine sound this time. No, Marcus. What you tried to do to me this morning, that was theft. This, I gestured to the papers, is restitution. The room was utterly still. Simon looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Layla simply stared at the documents on the table, her expression unreadable. You don't have another option, I continued, my voice gentle again. If Nexus Flow stays dark for another 12 hours, Viridian Stream ceases to be a viable company. Your valuation will plummet. Your investors will revolt. Your clients will abandon you. Your entire empire, I snapped my fingers. The sound sharp in the quiet room vanishes. Marcus ran both hands through his hair, his composure completely shattered. 5 million. That's extortion. 5 million, I repeated patiently, is the price for your education. An education in the consequences of hubris. He stared at me, his eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and defeat. And if I say no? I didn't even blink. Then Nexus Flow stays dormant forever. I'll open source the core architecture under a non-commercial license tomorrow morning. The world gets my work for free, and you can explain to the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the SEC why your company's only asset evaporated overnight because you fired its creator. Oh, and I'm sure the class action lawsuits from the shareholders will be fascinating to watch. Shall I have my lawyer forward you their contact information? His jaw worked, but no sound came out. It was Layla who spoke, her voice firm and clear. She's right, Marcus. He whipped his head around to stare at her. Excuse me? She stood up straighter, her spine seeming to lengthen. You think the board will side with you on this? After you single-handedly risked the entire company on a petty power play? You think the investors won't see the truth when the logs show your credentials were the ones that revoked Anya's access? She glanced at me, a flicker of respect in her eyes. The paper trail is crystal clear. This was your doing. I crossed my arms. The clock is ticking, Marcus. He stared at me, his face a canvas of pure, agonizing defeat. He knew he was trapped. He knew he had lost. Fine, he growled, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. Draft the damn agreements. I smiled. I already have. I pulled a fresh set of documents from the portfolio, the final, legally binding contracts, and slid them across the table. They were already signed by me. All they needed was his signature. His hand trembled as he reached for the pen I offered him. For a moment, I thought he might snap it in half. But he didn't. He uncapped it and, with a heavy, resentful stroke, signed his name. One line, then the next and the next. When he was finished, he shoved the papers back at me as if they were contaminated. It's done, he spat. I leaned forward, my voice low and final. No, Marcus. Now it begins. The next morning felt like stepping into a different reality. As I walked through the gleaming glass doors of the Viridian Stream headquarters, I wasn't an employee returning in shame. I was an owner, a board member. I was walking in as something they never imagined I could be, their equal. A hush fell over the lobby. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. The junior developers, the ones who had watched my firing with detached curiosity, now stared with a mixture of awe and fear. Word had spread like wildfire. The story of the CEO being forced to sign away the company's crown jewel to the very woman he had fired was the stuff of corporate legend, and it had happened less than 24 hours ago. Layla was waiting for me by the elevators. She offered a small, weary smile. Never seen him so quiet in a board meeting, she murmured as we stepped inside. He'll have to get used to it, I replied, watching the floor numbers climb. The executive floor was thick with a tension you could taste. I strode into the boardroom and took my new seat at the table, directly opposite Marcus. He was there, impeccably dressed as always, but he looked hollowed out. The swagger was gone, replaced by a brittle, guarded stillness. Anya, he said, forcing a smile that didn't come close to his eyes. Welcome back. I didn't come back, Marcus, I said, placing my leather portfolio on the polished table. I leveled up. A few of the other board members, older men and women who dealt in pragmatism, not ego, hid small chuckles behind their hands. As per the agreement signed last night, I began, opening the portfolio. Nexus Flow was fully restored at 3:15 a.m. Pacific Time. System integrity is at 100%. All client operations are back online. Investor confidence is stabilizing. You're welcome. Marcus nodded stiffly. The board appreciates your swift action. I tilted my head. Oh, this wasn't just about action. This is about accountability. I let that word hang in the air, watching him flinch. I turned to the rest of the board. As of today, I am the Chief Technology Officer, a voting member of this board, and the majority owner of the Nexus Flow IP. The documents have been filed with the state. It's official. An older board member, a stoic man named Robert Sterling, cleared his throat. The paperwork is in order. We've reviewed it. Excellent, I said. Then let's talk about our first order of business, internal security. I tapped a key on my laptop, and the large screen at the end of the room flickered to life. The slide was simple, with a single heading, Internal Threat Audit, Q3, Q4. Marcus's face went white. He knew what was coming. Over the past 6 months, I continued, my voice even and professional, Nexus Flow's internal security monitors logged a series of unauthorized access attempts on the core source code repository. Late-night logins, attempts to clone the primary architecture, queries into the patent-pending algorithms. The slide changed, showing a list of timestamps, IP addresses, and one username. M. Thorne. A collective gasp went through the room. These were not external threats, I stated, looking at each board member in turn. They were internal. They were directed, specifically, by our CEO. Marcus shot to his feet. This is a misrepresentation. I was conducting a review of our assets. I held up a hand, and the authority in the gesture was absolute. Sit down, Marcus. My voice was quiet, but it cracked like a whip in the silent room. You don't speak again until I'm finished. To the astonishment of everyone, including myself, he sat. It was the first time in 7 years he had ever taken a direct order from me. According to Section 7, Paragraph B of the Viridian Stream Shareholder Agreement, I went on, my gaze sweeping the room. Any executive officer found to be engaging in unauthorized intellectual property tampering or behavior that constitutes a direct and material conflict of interest is subject to immediate disciplinary review by the board. I clicked the remote again. A new slide appeared. It had only 4 words. Recommendation: removal of CEO. Dead silence. Robert Sterling leaned forward, his expression grim. Anya, are you formally recommending the termination of Mr. Thorne? Correction, Robert, I said gently. I'm demanding it. As a board member and as the guardian of this company's most valuable asset. Marcus's eyes darted around the table, desperately searching for an ally. He found none. The faces that looked back at him were cold, pragmatic, and disappointed. The board wasn't looking at the charismatic visionary anymore. They were looking at a liability. He jeopardized the entire company, another board member, Isabel, said, her voice sharp. This isn't just reckless. It's a fundamental breach of his fiduciary duty. The vote was a mere formality. It was unanimous. Security was called. Marcus stood there, trembling with a rage that had no outlet. For a terrifying second, I thought he might lunge across the table. But he didn't. He just stared at me, the look of a bully who has finally, after years of tormenting others, been punched in the mouth. This isn't over, he hissed as 2 uniformed security guards escorted him from the room. I looked at him, my expression calm, and said the only thing that needed to be said. Oh, Marcus. It already is. I turned back to the stunned but resolute faces of the board. Inside, a storm of emotions was swirling: relief, validation, a profound and weary sadness, but on the outside, I was composed. Now then, I said, my voice clear and strong. Let's get to work. We have a company to rebuild. Properly this time. The weeks that followed were a blur of intense, focused work. We weren't just recovering, we were reinventing. I rebuilt the engineering team from the ground up, promoting from within and fostering a culture of collaborative ownership instead of top-down fear. We didn't lose a single major client. In fact, after the public statement was released detailing my reinstatement and Marcus's removal for breaches of corporate governance, our story became a symbol of integrity. Our stock price, after the initial dip, climbed higher than ever before. I was in my element, finally free to nurture Nexus Flow not just as a product, but as an ecosystem. Life settled into a new rhythm, one of peace and purpose. Until the phone call. It came on a Tuesday afternoon. A blocked number. I almost ignored it. Anya Petrova speaking. A voice answered, smooth as polished marble and utterly devoid of warmth. Ms. Petrova. My name is Dorian. We should have a conversation. About what, Dorian? I'm quite busy. I represent a consortium with a keen interest in next-generation logistics platforms. Specifically yours. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Nexus Flow is the core asset of a publicly traded company. It's not for sale. A soft, condescending chuckle came through the line. Oh, we're not interested in Viridian Stream. The company is bloated, inefficient. We're interested in the technology itself. Our client is prepared to make a 9-figure offer for the exclusive rights to the Nexus Flow IP. 9 figures. The number was staggering. Tell your client that my work is not for sale. Not at any price. The velvet glove came off. The voice turned cold. You might want to reconsider your position, Ms. Petrova. This isn't a request. This is a notification. The line went dead. I stood there for a long moment, the silence of my office pressing in. This wasn't a business rival. This was something else. Organized. Predatory. That night, an email arrived. No sender, no subject line. Just a single line of text. We know about the Guardian Protocol. Check your back door. Tick-tock. My blood ran cold. I flew to my terminal, my fingers flying across the keyboard, running a deep diagnostic. And there it was. A ping. A tiny, almost imperceptible electronic knock on the emergency access port I had built years ago. The same one I had used to save the company. Someone else had found it. And they were knocking. The game had changed. This wasn't about a greedy CEO anymore. This was a war for the soul of my creation, and I was standing on the front line alone. But as I stared at the blinking cursor, a familiar resolve settled over me. They thought they could scare me. They thought they could take what I had fought so hard to reclaim. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I had built the locks. I had forged the keys. This was my house. And I would burn it to the ground before I let them take it.